Welcome back, all you veteran FreeMelons out there, and all of you FreeMelon initiates out there. I'm Eli Martyr. Thank you so much for joining me here in the secret classroom. We've got a very important talk to share with you today. We're going to be chatting about, We're going to be chatting about specialists and the role of specialists in society and how the approach to wisdom was different in the past, and how the new style approach of the specialist, a person who is particularly focused in one specific area of knowledge, how that style, that system, is not conducive to the best mode of holistic intelligence. And not only in health, but in every other field. Science, cosmology, astrology, anthropology, all of these individual disciplines where you have specialists, right? Where they don't work together, and their specialization prevents them from cognitively melding into a unified body of holistic intelligence, okay? So we're going to explore this general area. So we're going to start off with a brief introduction, then we're going to go into the origins of the problem, and then we're going to go into just a quick example of how this problem manifests itself in society today, and that'll be it. So let's get started. So let's go back a bit. In the years following the birth of America, the soil was rich, ripe, and fertile for the planting of seeds of a vibrant, new, freedom-loving American culture. Now, the tyrants and the aristocracy, the European aristocracy at the time, because of this new growth of American culture, they weren't particularly ready to simply allow the flourishing of this new land, of this new world, just this flourishing of freedom, where once all of those people had been European at one point and had been under their complete control and domination. So behind the scenes, the world leaders never lost their ambition of complete world domination, total global domination. It's simply that that plan went underground temporarily, or was hidden from view in place for the post-Enlightenment freedom movement of the American culture. So there was a time in the early years of North American culture where the crushing stranglehold of tyranny temporarily was mitigated. Now, in terms of the educational system of early America, major differences existed between the school system of the early Americans and the school system as we see it now today. Originally, there was a heavy emphasis placed on key disciplines of learning, namely language, arts, philosophy, even epistemology, which is the science of knowing, the science of knowledge. But most importantly, or not maybe most importantly, but of high regard and high esteem, was knowledge of the ancient civilizations of antiquity. This was so important to the original school systems, to the original state-run, non-federal run school systems. And why? Why is that so important? Why would history be so important, trumping all other disciplines? Think about it. Let's say you're a person and you live for 80 years and you accumulate hard life experience in 80 years of living. 80 years in the modern sense. Human potential is vastly more expansive than 80 years. Your body's not designed to wither and die after just 80 years. Give me a break. But I'm just using the common example. You live for 80 years, you pass on 80 years worth of knowledge as an elder to the young ones of the next generation in what? Like several classroom lectures, several sit-down lectures? You could pass on a whole lifetime of information, right? Very shortly, in just one generation. And that's just one generation. Now imagine hundreds and thousands of years of wisdom passed down over and over, generation upon generation. Can you imagine how powerful that information is? How much collective, so experience is so important. Direct experience very often trumps theoretical, conceptual understanding. That is why history is so important, because direct experience is, I'll just say it. The more you have direct experience with a thing, the more knowledge, the more wisdom you have in that field. Bar none, no exceptions, okay? That's why history is important. But there was a problem with this school system. And it wasn't really a problem. But the problem for the world engineers, for the Anglophile network, for the underground establishment, for the secret societies that supported and bolstered the aristocracy, for the priest class, for the Royal Society cronies and all that, for them, there was a problem here. Because that school system tended to breed strong, stable, even-minded, morally driven, highly intellectual, highly intelligent, family-oriented, highly noble people. Yeah, and that's a problem. You don't want free-thinking, enlightened, intelligent people running around understanding what they are and who they are, right? Yeah, you can't have that. So when the ruling class noticed that the school system was pumping out these free thinkers, all of the most influential in our history come from this period, this early period. You think that's a coincidence? So that was the problem. You had the world engineers who wanted complete control, and then you've got this upstart new American culture that is pumping out freedom under the guide of liberty and freedom and morality, and, something had to be done. Okay, so let's get into the origins of the problem. There were two contemporaries in the 18th century, 1700s, who are worth mentioning in this subject. You've got John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. Now, John Locke was an English philosopher and a physician, and was claimed to be the father of liberalism. Now, John Locke was a proponent of freedom and morality. He believed in the natural rights of man. He believed that government was not a good thing, and that the only role of government was for government to protect the natural rights of man as given to man by God. So he didn't believe in, things like original sin, like the priest class wanted you to believe, for insidious purposes and its purposes of mind control and all that kind of junk. But anyway, he believed that the individual had the personal responsibility of making for himself whatever life he wishes to lead. It wasn't someone else's job. It wasn't government's job to provide you things. The individual isn't a baby. I want to work here, and it's not fair that someone better than me has the job. I want it to... No. That's not how freedom works. That's not how true liberalism works. You get out of life what you put into it. And that's what he believed. Natural rights to life, liberty, and property. So he believed these heavily. John Locke was very influential in many of the revolutionaries that helped shape the growing American culture originally. And then eventually the nasty guys took over again. And we are where we are today. Political correctness, freedom of speech being stifled, complete top-down government control, police state, school system in shambles, idiots running all over the place, not knowing what the hell's going on. That's where we are today. Thomas Hobbes, one of John Locke's contemporaries, had some opposing views to John Locke. He was coming off of the European Civil Wars, the English Civil Wars, so strife and bloodshed and whatnot and chaos. So his worldview gets poisoned by this. And so he believed that human nature was inherently flawed, not like John Locke. John Locke believed in the tabula rasa, the clean slate. A baby is born just as a pure soul. And it's all the input that matters in creating the individual, right? But the baby isn't inherently good or evil. It's the input that goes in. Thomas Hobbes believes that you're born with faulty programming. You're born with human nature and human instincts, but none of these are evil by nature. But that's what Thomas Hobbes, this political philosopher, believed. He believed that selfishness and greed were the natural states of humankind, and that if left to their own devices, humanity would just wipe themselves out, because their greed and corruption and whatnot would just take over, and they would just kill everyone would just kill one another. And thus, it was the responsibility, now here's where it gets really ugly, it was the responsibility of a noble, eugenic, inbred, royal aristocracy of bloodline, illuminist, Freemasonic psychopaths. It was their responsibility to brainwash, indoctrinate, and completely control the minds and the bodies of the vast swaths of the rest of the mongrels and the swines of population, the peons, the workers, the villagers, the riffraff. They can't even think for themselves. They're literally dogs. And just on a side note, I digress a bit, this is actually how they consider you. The people that illegitimately run the world, pull the strings of world control, they at a fundamental level, they are not human. They actually believe, right? Deeply believe that they are a different species than you, and that you are below nothing, you are below dirt. Police and military are the worst regarded. They regard police and military as lapdogs, animals that they can just chain up and make them enforce their own policies on the rest of the population. I have many good friends who are in police and military, so it's, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but unfortunately, I'm just telling you as it is in how they regard you, right? They regard you as worse than lapdogs. Anyway, I don't want to digress too. Let's get back on track. So it is the role of this intellectual class to subjugate the rest of the population. That's what he believed. So this strict elitist, right, his philosophy is responsible for manifesting and bringing about the worst elements in humanity that we are currently seeing manifest. John Locke was heavily influenced by the Spartan civilization of Greek antiquity. Now here's a quote from this fantastic book, The Underground History of American Education. So I'm going to be summarizing a lot of one of the chapters in this book and just condensing and distilling it for you. If you have a chance, go out and grab this book by John Taylor Gatto. Fantastic book. He'll go into more detail on the subject I'm sharing with you today. So a lot of what I'm giving you today is from this particular chapter in this book that I felt was important for you to know. As the 19th century entered its final decades, American university training came to follow the Prussian/Spartan model. Service to the business and political state became the most important reason for college and university existence after 1910, right? No longer about learning, it's about political service, training individuals to do what the state wants. Very important. No longer was college primarily about developing mind and character in the young. Instead, it was about molding those things as instruments for use by others. So that is the type of philosophy and movement that Thomas Hobbes was a proponent of. And as you can imagine, the ruling class, they see this philosopher, and what do? They promote and they promulgate that philosophy everywhere. Now, Hobbes' philosophy of mental colonization, this spread everywhere throughout Europe, in Prussia, in the Netherlands, in Holland, France, everywhere in Europe, all of the major influential countries in Europe. Okay, so all you need to really know here is this. So from the 1700s to the 1800s, Thomas Hobbes' philosophy of mental colonization dominated France, Britain, Prussia, Holland, and all of the most influential European countries. But that influence failed to suffuse through the newly growing American culture, where the philosophy of John Locke was happily taking root. And this laid the foundation for the freedom movement in America, while all of Europe was being crushed by this tyrannical philosophy of Thomas Hobbes. Now, as we said earlier, the study of history was so important to the early schoolmasters and the early school institutions. Now, there's a section in the book here that talks about classical Greek civilization. And in Athens, there was a region went by the name of the Hellas. And the school system, the institution of learning developed in the Hellas, is very critical for you to know, and I'm going to share that with you here. Early America rested easily on a foundation of classical understanding, one subversive to the normal standards of British class society. The lessons of antiquity were so vital to the construction of every American institution, it's hardly possible to grasp how deep the gulf between then and now is without knowing a little bit about those lessons. Let's talk about the Hellas in ancient Athens. In classical Athenian civilization, prominent positions of social responsibility were handed out by a lottery, it seems. Social responsibility, now listen to this, social responsibility and trust in the population was at heights unimaginable today, okay? So trust in the competency of the average man was assumed, okay? Do you get that? Trust in the average competency of the average man, of the average civilian, was simply something that was assumed to be true. How important is that? So jobs and roles, again, were handed out in a draw, in a lottery. They just assumed that anybody could be anything they wanted so long as they applied themselves. That was the faith that these people had in humanity, right? Amazing. Now listen closely. Children were taught how to become rational, thinking, responsible citizens who had the ability to apply their reason to any subject and achieve competency worthy of valued citizenship. You were expected to think clearly and embrace responsibility. Expected to. Foregone conclusion. If you were a person, if you were a human being, you were naturally gifted with intelligence that was capable of apprehending any subject whatsoever. So what's important is not to teach children what to think, it's just to teach them how to think, how to learn anything. And then you apply that to anything and you can become anything. Huge difference in the approach. Okay? Now, listen to this. Professionalism did exist in the sense that we understand it now. The engineer, the heart surgeon, plumber. Okay, so professionals did exist. But it was not highly regarded as anything of merit because it was understood that, listen very closely, professionalism was an enslavement of the mind along narrow tracks. I'm going to repeat that. Professionalism was an enslavement of the mind along narrow tracks. In other words, if all you have is a hammer, the rest of the world looks like a nail. Essentially, if I had to sum it up. Now here's where it really gets interesting. What kind of school system do you imagine was extant in the Hellas, in ancient Athens, that brought about these types of learned individuals, these types of individuals that the state trusted so much? What kind of school system do you think it was? Do you think it was something like what we have today? No, of course not, obviously. The answer is zero. There was no formal school structure at all. Yeah. Completely different culture. Totally different. Yes, there were school houses and Platonic institutions of learning, but the way they were set up was more like recreational centers, like a YMCA or a gym or just an average rec center today. Places that you could go to that were just a community service where people could work and whatnot and learn if they wanted to. But it wasn't a rigid type of school system where you were forced to go and learn and rear your children. It was nothing like what we have today. That's all they had for learning. Now, why is this important? Now, when we consider the most influential people of history, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Voltaire, Mark Twain, William Shakespeare, all of these individuals, okay? There's a common denominator amongst all of them, and that is all of them had minimal to no formal education or schooling, aka indoctrination. They had none of this, or very, very little. I think George Washington only had a couple of years of elementary school and then he dropped out. That's the same for many of them. Some of them had none. Here's another quote from John Taylor Gatto. Young Americans were allowed close to the mechanism of things. This rough and tumble practice kept social classes elastic and American achievement in every practical field superb. So the way these people grew up, they were raised with an understanding that practical application in the world, direct field experience with things, with people, with jobs, with problem solving, gardening, with field work, with banking. You just had to go out and do them, and experience made you a master, made you wise in those fields, right? What this did was this brought on an incredible degree of maturity very early in childhood. By the time you were 9 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, you were a man. You were mature. If you were a woman, you were mature as a woman. And when you mature very fast, mentally, intellectually, your adult life is totally different. Young people in America were expected to make something of themselves, not to prepare themselves to fit into a pre-established hierarchy. Every foreign commentator notes the early training in independence, the remarkable precocity of American youth, and their assumption of adult responsibility. Okay, so I hope that gives you a good backdrop into how the old system of education was styled and how some of the ancient antiquity civilizations were styled in their learning and their approach. Completely different culture, okay? Totally different and probably more successful. I was watching a lecture and it gave me an idea to make this video for you guys. So the lecturer I'm talking about is a guy named Sachin Panda. In this lecture, the circadian theory of health, what he's talking about is he's talking about how sleep cycles influence the health and wellness and psychological health of a person, and how original sleep cycles were much more in tune with nature, and modern sleep cycles, because of things like light and technology and all these kind of things, prevent us from getting proper sleep and proper rest and regulating our eating cycles and all that, which is all totally correct information, totally valid. I'm on board with that, and I agree with all of it, basically. But there are elements in the presentation that just really stuck out as, exemplary of this type of narrow track mind that professionalism locks you into, where you don't even see some of the other things that would be completely obvious maybe to another professional. The point is we need to harmonize these compartmentalized fields, otherwise we're chickens with our heads cut off. Nutrition, for example, which is where I'm focusing, obviously, is so confused. You run into professionals. All of you guys are just running into professionals that are looking here and here and here and here and here, and you're getting totally conflicting views and theories from all of these wide sources, and no wonder you guys are confused. Not you guys, I mean, saying no wonder people in general are confused. Is fat good? Is fat bad? Are eggs good? Are eggs bad? I hear eggs are good. Oh, you should not boil your eggs. You should roast your eggs. Eggs are terrible for you. Eggs are, total confusion. And it's because of this whole system that we have that's designed around compartmentalized learning. Okay, here are some excerpts of examples of how this rigid-minded professionalism detracts from our progress.
As infrastructure develops, we are less likely to be physically active. Modern rhythm is something like this. We are in dimly lit room like this for 24 hours. We have sufficient access to light. We have very little sleep, very little opportunity for physical activity. And then as long as our eyes are open, our mouth is open. And in fact, we are told that in every 2 to 3 hours we have to eat. So as a result, there is this complete disruption of circadian rhythm that happens that for most of us.
So here we have an example of some good information, good supplementary information about disruptions in the normal sleep patterns and whatnot, how they can affect you. And, this is all good information. This is where specialization can be of value, right? What it should be, just supplemental information to assist holistic understanding.
2,000 publications showing how circadian rhythm disruption, either in real life situation, among shift workers, or in clinical control condition, or in animal models, can lead to these diseases. And what is scary is the ones that are in red affect more than 10% of the population. So that means for these diseases, there are at least 30 million people in the US. So what the field of circadian rhythm does is to figure out whether we can train our clock, we can maintain a healthy clock and prevent or reverse our disease, or we can time the drug, and then the third and most emerging aspect is, can we really drug the clock so that with a simple drug we can drive a healthy clock? And that's a little bit futuristic.
Drugs as a cure? Why would this even be an option? Why would this even be something that you would bring up in this lecture? Why would drugs be something that is a valid remedy to an issue that has to deal with something as simple as sleep? If we can introduce a proper drug to get the right effects? Yeah, no. How about you just get some bloody sleep at the right times? Maybe that's the cure. So why we're bringing up drugs is just playing to the normal established system of things, the way we've always done things. And that is not progress, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, the audience is just here eating this up. This is where I really got a bit ticked. Look at Sachin Panda's choice of average foods, right? Typical foods that you would eat throughout the day. Look at this.
The idea is very simple. Nutrition science has told us that as long as we keep eating in the morning when we start our breakfast, then we have the right enzyme, the right hormone, and the right microbiome, and our body is primed to digest that food, take some of that food, and burn carbohydrate to fuel our body, and at the same time store a little bit of fat. And it continues as long as we eat throughout the day. And then after our last bite,
toast, eggs, bacon, and milk for breakfast. We've got a burger and Coke at lunchtime, and we've got chicken and wine later on in the day. Now, okay, so here's the thing. What really bothers me about this is these food items that he's listed on the board, they weren't a joke. Now, it would be different if it was a joke. You're saying, oh, well, you know how the typical American is, and these are the types of trashy foods that we eat, and we're all sick because of it. Okay. It would be different if that was his approach. But what he's done here is he's just simply put these foods here as if they were normal. And it's not a joke, right? Look how serious, he's just kind of totally normalizing these things. And if you listen to the audience doesn't seem to interpret this as a joke either. Anyone who has any knowledge of health whatsoever would see these food items in a lecture, in a presentation, and laugh. Nonsense. Utter nutritional nonsense. There's not a peep in the audience, right? They just see that and like, yeah, okay, that's what you eat. That is very troubling to me, because when you normalize these things, oh God, anyone with one iota of nutritional responsibility would not dream of putting these foods in a presentation where you are presenting to an audience the average food a person should consume in a day. If you are in any position where you are to be of instructive value, this type of wild ignorance of nutrition is not acceptable. I don't care what profession you're in, this is not acceptable. No mention at all of these things being unhealthy. He just displays them as food, right? And, because again, this is all this guy can see.
so then the question was, can we take some overweight and obese people who are eating for 14 or 15 hours and then ask them to do only one change? The only one change they have to do in their life is to figure out a 10-hour window and then try to eat whatever they want to eat without changing drastically what they're eating within that 10 hours. So we have done this experiment now quite a few times, and other people around the world have been reproducing this. And the good news is within 10 to 12 weeks, people actually lose a modest amount of body weight. The overall health actually improves, and I'll go over some of those.
Weight loss with just proper sleep alone, which is fantastic. And that shows you the power of proper rest. I will advocate this any day. Proper rest, proper sleep will do you wonders. The problem here, it still should be taken only supplementary, right? Supplementary to holistic understanding, because proper sleep will only get you so far if you are eating the way that Mr. Panda here suggests is normal to eat. Your healing will only take you so far, and then you will be at a plateau where you will no longer be able to get any better, right? You might experience weight loss, but you're going to be plagued with health problems if you eat the way this guy suggested is normal, and you just get good sleep, right? So that's why it's as important. And it's unfortunate because the audience that doesn't know better is going to have this false sense of security now, whereby they think, oh, all of the corrupt practices and all of the immoral behaviors I have in my life and my eating and whatnot, I don't have to pay attention to any of it, because all I need to do is regulate my sleep patterns like I saw in that lecture yesterday, and I'll be fine and I'll be perfectly healthy. Nope, not how it works, folks.
But then the big question comes, what about coffee? You can have coffee from your start time until about, say, lunch. Or maybe 2 o'clock, but not beyond that, because coffee has a half-life of around 6 hours for most of us. If you want to do a clean theory, then coffee may not be okay. And then the third one is, if you cannot live without it, we don't want to take the last joy of life from your life.
If you haven't seen my lecture on stimulation, go and watch that lecture on stimulation. Just pander to what is normal and what people like to do, no matter how unhealthy it is. Give them an excuse to do it. It's all good. It's all fine and dandy.
During cancer treatment, the new studies are showing that if we time the drug to the right time, then we can improve efficacy and we can get cure. Then the third, even after cancer treatment, if we stay on time-restricted eating, then we can reduce the risk of getting relapse.
And finally, we're talking about cancer. Obviously, we knew we were going to get into this. The cure for cancer is proper sleep. And yes, it is, in a manner of speaking. But there is that manner of speaking that is foreign to him, that he doesn't understand because, again, he just doesn't have the background, doesn't have the understanding. Suggesting that people can have coffee and eat the normal diet that he was touting earlier in the lecture, no excuse for this type of wild nutritional ignorance in, a society where you have such amazing access to knowledge, even as a professional. Count Leo Tolstoy. Take a hazard at 100 children of several educated generations and 100 uneducated children of the people, and compare them in anything you please, in strength, in agility, in mind, in the ability to acquire knowledge, even in morality, and in all respects you are startled by the vast superiority on the side of the children of the uneducated. Count Leo Tolstoy. My loveliest FreeMelons, thank you so much for joining me on this lecture once again. I have to reiterate once again, this is not to put down professionals in the general sense. You know that that's not what I'm saying. You know that I'm approaching these lectures with love and care and only the highest aspirations for the highest evolution of all of humankind. You know that that's where I'm coming from. So please, if you're gonna say something like, oh, you're hating on heart surgeons or whatever, I'm not interested in hearing that. You know that's not the case. What I am saying, though, is I'm giving you some truths about history and how civilizations were different and how certain modalities are just not as conducive to the best manifestation of human potential. And the one that we are currently living under is not the best suited for the unfolding of human potential. To be more specific to the subjects that we tackle in this particular channel, when it comes to your health and your wellness, you must understand that when you go to the heart specialist, the endocrine specialist, the skin specialist, the eye specialist, the dental specialist, any of these types of people who are specializing in a particular field, in not understanding how the whole body, how the vital system works in its entirety as a holistic unit, unless you understand that, they will always be hamstrung in the amount and efficacy of the advice that they can give you. There's nothing that works in the absence of any other function in the body. All works harmoniously together and all influence one another. The endocrinologist will not be able to give you everything that you need to know about healing because he doesn't understand the heart, the lungs, breathing, the ether, sunlight, all of these things, right? He's not a fasting expert. So you really got to understand that when you go to these specialists for health guidance, right? It's the classic tale of the blind man and the elephant, right? If you're not familiar with this one, you've got a couple of blind men. Let's say you got 3 blind men, and they're all standing around an elephant. The first blind man touches the elephant's tusk, and he says, "What is this?" And he says, "Well, this is obviously a spear or a harpoon that I'm touching." The other blind man who's near the elephant's leg touches his leg and says, "What is this?" He's like, "Well, it's obviously some sort of tough tree trunk." And then the other blind man is near the elephant's tail, and he's touching the tail, and he's like, "Oh, it's obviously some sort of serpent or whatever." Every single blind man is touching the same elephant, but none of them realize that they're touching a goddamn elephant. Why? Because none of them can see the elephant for what it is. If there's one thing that you take away from this lecture, just remember the allegory of the blind men and the elephant. There you go. Boom! The whole lecture complete. 2 seconds. Wow, everything else was unnecessary. Thank you so much, my lovely FreeMelons. I love you all very much, and I hope this was very helpful to you. Please subscribe, and if this was of help, if this was of use, please give this video a thumbs up and help contribute, help share the good work. We're all in this together. Let's uplift and bring humanity up and evolve together in mind, in thought, and in body. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you next time here in the secret classroom on the FreeMelon Society.